supporting us as we share our memories of our most memorable year together, Pete and I. And I think as an introduction to Pete's presentation, which will follow, I would like to read a brief account of my personal experience with this big, great circle adventure. The year was 1993, and it was memorable for two major reasons. We were married on April 27th, and 4 days later, on May 1st, we stepped off land and onto our boat to begin living Pete's dream. A dream that evolved from his lifelong love of boating. You may be wondering if I shared the same dream. Well, I enjoy boating. Growing up on the coast of Florida, water sports were our family's favorite recreation. But what I really enjoy is adventure. And when Pete shared with me his dream on our first date, I was fascinated. He told me he planned to retire early at the age of 55 and spend a year traveling the waterways of eastern North America. His plan was to cruise 6,500 miles on the waterways in a year. That sounded like a big dream to me, and I wondered if he would actually do it. So many dreams just remain dreams. There are always obstacles in the way that become excuses for putting the dream off to another day in the future that never comes. But we continued to date, and our relationship deepened, and Pete continued to talk about his dream. Then one day, he asked me if I would consider going with him as his first mate. I told him I would think about it. There was certainly a lot to think about. I had worked hard to build a successful real estate career. What would happen to it if I was gone a year? I had 2 children, both pretty much grown up, one in college and one a recent college graduate. Both were very supportive of me doing this trip and promised they would come and cruise with us at different times. And that helped, but I still knew it would be difficult for me to be away from home for a full year. And there were many other things to consider as well. The thought of stepping out of my busy life for a full year was very scary, but was becoming more enticing. Pete picked the date of May 1st, 1993, to embark on this voyage. That was 4 years in the future, so that gave me some time to consider all the pros and cons. But in the meantime, there was much to be done to prepare for the voyage. Pete drew up a 4-year action plan for us to follow on a monthly basis. Top on the to-do list was to find the right boat and outfit it with the best available equipment to ensure a safe and enjoyable cruise. The perfect boat turned out to be a 13-year-old, 42-foot Hatteras trawler. It needed many upgrades, from the engine room to the flybridge. Pete spent the next 3 years making the upgrades. I spent the next 3 years learning to become a more proficient boater. Pete wanted me to become skilled enough to handle the boat alone with confidence when he needed a break or if he became incapacitated for some reason. For this adventure, it became clear I needed to be able to function as crew, first mate, and co-captain. After all, there was just the 2 of us. It also became clear there was a lot for me to learn, all the while continuing to attend to my growing real estate career. Was this possible? Could I do this? When those thoughts caused more anxiety than I could comfortably handle, I would tell myself to just take one step at a time, do the next right thing, and trust that all would be well. And so it was. May 1st, 1993 seemed to come much sooner than I expected, but when it came, we were ready. After enjoying a fun yacht club send-off party and saying goodbye to our many boating friends and family members, we were ready to begin the adventure. I really had no idea what was in store for us. In one of my fantasies during the planning phase, I imagined we were anchored out on a lovely secluded lake, just the 2 of us, eating the evening meal I had prepared, watching the sun go down, talking about the events of the day. However, The reality was that we stayed in marinas most nights, so we could connect to electricity, water, and cable TV for weather reports. I cooked very little. Other boaters were always eager to invite us to join them for dinner at local restaurants, to share boating experiences. I learned very early how social many boaters are, and that was a good thing. There was much to learn from them, and we were grateful for a helping hand when we needed it. I also had no idea that our first experience of adventure would occur so early in our journey. The Mississippi River was flooded. The only way for us to go upriver to St. Louis was to be tied onto a towboat, pushing 35 barges up the flooded Mississippi. After 4 days of living on the towboat, we were cut loose at 3 a.m. in pitch darkness to find our way to the Illinois River. That was just the beginning of many adventures yet to come. What I like about adventure is how alive you feel in it. Not knowing what might happen keeps your senses awake and your mind focused and attentive. You stay very present. That was my daily experience on this voyage. Every day we were traveling in waters I had never traveled before, to places I had never been before. I was never bored. My mind was wide awake all day and slept soundly every night. I love being outdoors in nature. Nature has many mysteries and much to be awed by. We saw many amazing sunrises and sunsets, beautiful rainbows, fascinating storm clouds, the moon's reflection on the water, star-filled night skies, and so much more. Because we steered the boat from the fly bridge, we were always outside, except for bedtime, and even then, nature embraced us. Sleeping on the water, cradled in our comfortable stateroom bed, feeling the waves softly rocking our boat, was heaven to me. Waking in the morning to a cool breeze and hot coffee while watching sunrise, listening to the birds sing, was a beautiful way to start the day. Early in our journey, I began to hope our year would go slowly and not end too quickly. But sadly for me, the year ended way too soon. I had become so renewed and enriched by this experience. I was not eager for it to end. I am still today grateful for the memories, and especially grateful that I met and married a man with a dream.
Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you, Sarah. It's always hard to follow her eloquence, I'll tell you. She really knows how to speak her mind. She mentioned the trip. Let's see if I can figure out how to use the, yes, there's a map of the trip, which is a map over here too. And I have another pointer, if I can use it once in a while. I can maybe show you on that map where we were, because it doesn't really work up on this screen. First, I'd like to really thank Jack Ferris for asking me to put this together, and it was great to go back and review everything we had from 27 years ago. And also to Ashley, we had to have slides converted to photos to JPEGs and all those kinds of things. So some of the clarity is not real good, but I think you'll still see what we enjoyed. This was our boat that Sarah mentioned, and I'll give you a quick tour on this map over here. If you can see the pointer on that map, here's Nashville, down the Cumberland River. Then we were dragged up to St. Louis by a towboat in the Mississippi River, where we got in the Illinois River to Chicago, up the east coast of Lake Michigan, across the north end of Lake Huron, and then a couple of French canals up to Ottawa, the capital, up to Montreal. And then we turned south, come down through Lake Champlain, down to New York, top of the Chesapeake. We went all the way down to Key West. When the weather, we spent 6 weeks in Key West, and then when the weather was good again, we had spring for a year, so we just kind of followed the weather. And We went back up to Stewart, Florida, across the Gulf of Mexico, over to Mobile, Alabama, and then came back home. It's about 368 days, I think, if my logbook's correct. This boat, where Sarah is standing, is the bow of the boat, and there was 2 V-berths up there for guests and a bathroom, color TV. We had a stack washer dryer, very similar to the one we have here. In fact, my shower reminds me some of my shower on too, so it's like being back in a boat. The aft end of the boat had was where our master stateroom was. We had a queen-size bed, a bathroom, color TV. And the flybridge Sarah mentioned up on top is where we really spent most of our time and enjoyment. First one I'll start with is downtown Nashville at the foot of Broad. When the steamboats were down here, she mentioned the history that we followed. All the waterways we were on were just full of history, all kinds of history. Interestingly enough, on this one at the foot of Broad, the shoreline on behind these boats is where my office was for 20 years when I was with a sand company over there. And now it's Nissan Stadium, so. This is the yacht club we belong to, Cedar Creek Yacht Club up on Old Hickory Lake. And they had a big going away party for us on May 1st, 1993. And while the party was going on, Sarah and I got on the boat, fired up the engines, and we left. We started our trip. The music. I'm talking a lot about locks, so if you're not very familiar with a lock, see if I can, yeah. Okay, thank you for this pointer, Ashley. It makes a big difference. We didn't have one before on this screen. This is Cheatham Lock down by Ashland City. If you're not familiar with a lock, this is the high water end up here. There's a dam across the river. There's a power plant for the electrical generation. These are the gates that let you in the top, and then there's gates down here that let you out the bottom. So if you're going upstream, you pull in, they open the gates, you pull in, they fill it with water, and you open the gates at the top, and you go on your way, and you just reverse it. So it's really all done with gravity. This is also a normal pool. Nice summer day with the river the way you'd like it. This is the same lock at flood. Cheatham Lock at Ashland City, and it floods fairly routinely. The Corps of Engineers knows how to handle that. I mention that because we'll deal with 2 flooded rivers on our trip, and the main problem with a flood is debris. There's hundreds of millions of tons of trees and logs and all sorts of things that come down with that. So the Mississippi River was flooded, as Sarah said. It was 30 feet above normal, levee to levee. And I'm going to explain what a tow is for you first, before I show you how we got up to St. Louis. Back here is the towboat, and that towboat is pushing these 35 barges. And the 35 barges, there's 7 across the front, and then there's 5 barges long. So it's 245 feet wide and 1,000 feet long. It's about 4.5 acres of barges. And that's a typical tow going down the Mississippi River. And that would be called a tow, which would be the boat and the barges. So what I wanted to do, I had been president of Ingram Barge, and the company, I asked them before I retired if we had trouble with this part of the Mississippi River, if we could hook our boat onto one of their barges and let it drag us up to St. Louis. And of course they said they'd be glad to do that. So what I wanted to do was be able to tuck our boat in right where this Ingram Barge Company sign is, right beside it. It would be ideal because these barges in front of us would be knocking all of the debris out of the way that was coming down the river. So
makes sense.
That's what we were able to do. And the real fun part about it was we were able to board the towboat, and for 4 days and nights, Sarah and I slept and ate on the towboat with the crew over there. So she got to really see towboat life. Our boat weighed about 50,000 pounds, so it was had to really hook it up well to be able to drag it to St. Louis. This is a view from the pilot house of the towboat, and you'll notice he doesn't have a steering wheel. He's got sticks in his hand, which are steering rudders, and that's how they operate that's how they steer the tow. The crew are on 6 hours, off 6 hours, on 6 hours, off 6 hours for 30 days, roughly. They usually have about a 30-day stint on the boat. And the big deal is food. The cook gets up very early in the morning and cooks all the food for the day, puts it out around breakfast time. So this was breakfast one morning. And typical galley. This was a typical galley in the towboat. Actually, it's not moving. I think something wrong. Oh, there we go. Okay, let me back up if I can then. That's the towboat. The crews work very hard when they're at either end of the trip. They have to wire all those barges together with cables and ratchets. They also do all their own maintenance and cleaning on the boat. I'm having a little trouble with the clicker here, but let me back. This is inside a barge to give you a feeling for what it's like in there. It's about 12.5 foot deep. Most of them hold about 1,200 tons. Common commodities would be grain or coal. And this is Sarah out on the tow that we were on going to St. Louis, and she is right there. Back here, that little dot back there is the towboat. So we're 1,000 foot from the towboat. You can't hear the engines. It's quiet out there. All you hear is a little bit of sloshing in the water. Oh, well, now they're going. I'm just having a bit of trouble. This is the quarters inside the towboat. You see a lot of guitars on the towboat. We got off, as she said, about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning in pitch black in St. Louis, and we found the Illinois River. The Illinois River was also flooded. This is the levee along the Illinois River, and it's breached the levee here. We went up this river. Of course, we couldn't make much time because the current was so swift. And after we got late in the day, we found a lake that was kind of off to the side of the river, and we pulled over, and I dropped anchor, and Sarah was making dinner, and I was out checking the boat, and a fellow came by in a little aluminum skiff, and he was fishing. And I said, "Is there anything we need to watch for in the morning when we leave?" And he laughed. He said, "I don't know." He said, "You're anchored in my front yard." And I turned around and looked up the hill, and there was his house, and the house sloped down to his yard. And he said, "It's the first time a boat had anchored in his yard." I mentioned we had good weather the whole way, like spring. In the barge business, the barges go to Chicago year-round, so this is winter time, breaking ice. Just shows you. This is coming into Chicago. We could see the buildings of Chicago from a big distance away. I'll mention here too that we were fortunate. I had written for some boating magazines, and people knew we were coming and had written us letters before we had gone. There was a couple in Chicago, for instance, that had written us a letter, so we called them when we got there. They saw it, they put us into their yacht club, they picked us up, took us to dinner downtown Chicago, just treated us royally while we were there. And that happened a number of times on the trip. Also did a newsletter every 2 weeks. We both did the newsletter, and copies of it are on the table over there, along with some other memorabilia from the trip. We had 250 subscribers for the newsletter, so it was fun to have people following us. To go through Chicago, there's about 29 bridges, and I put the mast down on our boat so we could clear the bridges. And most of the bridges we cleared by about a foot. And going, we went through Chicago at rush hour under Wacker and Michigan Avenue, and it was really interesting. People would be looking over the bridge saying, "How'd you get here from Nashville?" And that happened to us a lot on the trip. We did have to have 2 bridges open, the railroad bridge and the highway bridge. I'll mention this couple. They're named the Browns, and they had made a great circle trip like we did the year before. So he was familiar with most of the trip, and he was a font of information, as was his wife, for both of us. So we met him in Kentucky, then we met him again in, we met him in Florida, we met him in Mobile. We were on different different schedules and going to different things, but we kept bumping into them and it was fun. The other thing about them is in the whole year we traveled, it was the only other couple in 1993 that was making this trip. We found nobody else who was doing it then. Now, instead of calling it the Great Circle like this map shows over here, they call it the Great Loop, and they call the people that do the trip loopers. And it's all over the web, so if you want to take a look at it, you can. And I say here, we circumnavigated the island of Eastern North America. So let's see what else. The Browns are there. We started up the eastern side of Lake Michigan. I'll try to remember my pointer here once in a while for you. So we've come down the Cumberland High, up the Mississippi, up the Illinois, through Chicago. Now we're going to do the east side of Lake Michigan. And the marinas were all wonderful. And I was surprised going back and looking at all our old slides and photos, how much flowers were in our pictures and slides and trip. What really enhanced the experience of the trip. We were in one of the marinas one night, sitting on the stern of our boat, and this largest musical water fountain in the world started up. We saw fireworks a number of different places. Holland, Michigan is on the eastern shore, making wooden shoes, had tools. And we were surprised to find Sleeping Bear Dunes, sand dunes up in Michigan. Some of you are probably familiar with them, but they can be 800 feet tall. They were formed during the Ice Age. And it just seemed like we were on the ocean whenever you see that much sand. This is Sarah's sister and her husband came to ride with us for a week. And they brought us a present. They brought us 2 big stuffed fish. And they didn't know that when you're traveling for a year on a boat, that every nook and cranny and drawer is full of stuff. We didn't have any place to put the fish. And we laughed and had a good time about them, and we shipped the fish home. And after that, when we had guests coming, we reminded them if they want to bring us a present, please bring us a small present. And also to bring collapsible luggage was real helpful too, if they would do that. Typical inlet off of the eastern shore of Lake Michigan. This is Charlevoix. We were in the first lake, and then we were also back in the second lake. We got a car a number of times and drove to sea to extend our radius of looking around. This was the top of Sleeping Bear Dunes. Give you a view from the top. Leland, Michigan is on the north end of Lake Michigan, had unusual fishing boats. I put this one just to recall, if we could have a weather channel that when the wind was blowing, we just didn't want to go. There wasn't any real reason to go out and just get beat up all day. So when the wind was blowing, if we knew it was going to blow, we would just rent a car. And all the marinas had rental cars or courtesy cars or golf carts or something for us to ride. We did still, in spite of all this, we did get into bad weather and fog and some other things. You just can't avoid it when you're out cruising. Fortunately, our boat was really built for all this. North end of Lake Michigan is Beaver Island. We went over there, and there were some couples, and we all rented a car and went all over the island where there were a bunch of craftsmen. But a lot of people don't know that island is up there. From there, I'll show you over here. We start across towards Lake Huron now. We'll go under the Mackinac Bridge and then go up into the North Channel, which is on the north end of Lake Huron. This is the Mackinac Bridge. It's 5 miles long. I think they built it to last 1,000 years. And the interesting thing for us was as we approached the bridge, we could hear kind of a humming noise. And I was wondering what that was. And it turns out that this is a car. So you can see through the bridge. It's a steel grating bridge. And when a car or truck went by, that's what would cause the humming sound. Mm-hmm. Mackinac Island, this is the Grand Hotel. The front porch is like 660 feet long, the longest front porch in the world. Mackinac Island was also great for, see if the clicker will do it. Let's skip some back. They also didn't permit vehicles, so it was horse and carriage. Again, you can see the flowers. Up at the very top, there's some buildings, and that was the fort that was up there. They did reenactments all the time. We were in the marina just below this, so every night we heard taps, and in the morning we would hear a reveille from the fort. We went, this is the rocks in the north end of Lake Huron, excuse me, where we encountered a lot of rocks. And we went through Canadian customs just before we did this. We're past the 45th parallel, halfway to the North Pole. It's now light from like 5 in the morning till 11 at night. We quit using the American dollar and started using the loonie, and we started to fly the Canadian flag for being out of the country. And we began to learn how to navigate around rocks. There were just a lot of rocks to deal with. This is an anchorage up in the north end. This is now, we're up here in the north end of Lake Huron. And people had told us about this anchorage. Sarah had taken the dinghy ashore and walked up to the top of the hill, and she was picking berries. I'm on the boat. Our boat is the one at the bottom there. And she's taken my picture. We have this picture framed and blown up in our unit. If you ever come by, certainly one of our favorite photos. This is a close-up. You can see me on the boat. And that's her on top of the hill. And that's the view that she had from up there. That evening we went up there and watched sunset, and it's one of the few places where you couldn't hear a car, you couldn't see any lights, there were no contrails in the sky at night. It was just a wonderful anchorage called Croker Island. I'm sorry, that clicker's just not. Is there another way to click those, Ashley? I have to do it here. Pardon me? Yeah, it's not doing it all the time. Okay. Maybe that'll help it. Thank you. Yeah, that helps it. We don't go the wrong way. No. It jumped ahead of us. Wow. It's jumping around. I'm sorry for that. Let's see if I can back up to. Yeah, it works a lot better if I hold it up in the air, so that's good to know. Let's see, where was I? We were up in the north end, right? Yeah. Hmm? In the light.
I can control it from back here. Where would you like to be in the presentation?
Okay, keep going back, 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 back to the rocks. There you go. Right there.
Yeah, ready.
Yep, thank you. This was the backside of the island where we were anchored. It happened to be a pink granite island. And the island behind it, they said, was mostly mica. And we learned how to navigate with a lot of different rocks, especially with different times of the day. This was a couple we met on Lake Michigan. They were doing a different trip. They were taking their sailboat and doing some of the part we were doing, then they were going down to Florida, then they were going to the Bahamas and down the Virgin Islands and other places with their boat. They're coming over, I think, to have dinner with us, and the other thing he loved is we could give him a bag of ice. We had an ice maker on our boat, and he just loved to get the ice. This is the only natural fjord in North America. It's up in the north end of Lake Huron. It's about 10 miles deep. There's a little island in the back of it, and a woman owns it. Her name is Mrs. Evinrude. And her husband had invented the Evinrude outboard motor. This is Georgian Bay. It's 30,000 islands, all rock, and That's right in this area, right up here on the map. You see the pointer. It's 185 miles. It's a little bit of treacherous navigation. They have real small buoys. It's where the Frenchmen, when they would have all their furs, would load their canoes and then paddle through these islands. So we really followed the canoe path through here. We would rent a car, even in Georgian Bay, and we went up, and this is a field of flowers. I mentioned flowers were with us most of the way. These are friends of ours that lived on Woodmont Boulevard here in town. They wanted to come and ride with us for a week. They flew to Toronto and chartered a float plane and came and found us in the north end of Lake Huron. And the white bag that Marge is holding in her hand was the bag we really wanted. That was our mail. From there, we entered one of the first canal systems in Canada. It's called the Trent-Severn Waterway, and it's right in this part of the map up here. It lets you skip 3 of the Great Lakes. We really skip Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario. It's 44 locks. The lockmaster hand turns the locks open. It's 16 revolutions to open a lock, and the lock gates are made out of wood. And it's just a wonderful experience because they chat with you and tell you the history and all the local lore. Towns along the Trent-Severn Waterway, there'd be a town, they all had a dock. You could just tie up and walk into town, go to lunch, go to dinner, go to the hardware store, grocery store, and or spend the night if you wanted to on the town. This is called Big Chute. Different than a lock. That railroad came down here into the water, and it would they'd pick us up down here. You pull in, and they would put straps around your boat, and then that railroad takes you up the hill over a highway where the cars are stopped, and then puts you in a lake up top. It's called Big Chute. And I have to tell you, before we got to Big Chute, we were waiting for a lock, and the wind was blowing real hard, and I wanted to anchor instead of just keep circling for 2 hours, and I dropped anchor, and we were aground on some rocks. And while we were sitting there, a gentleman called us on the radio, and he said, "Are you having trouble?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You aground?" I said, "Yeah." He said he'd bring his boat close if I could throw a line to him. His wife would tie it down, and he thought he could pull us off the rocks. And I said, "That would be great." So he came by, I threw the line, it hit their boat, she got it, took it over the railing, and she tied it down, and he pulled us off the rocks. We went on through the lock. We came to a little town where we were going to spend the night together. We went to dinner, and when Sarah and I met him, the woman was blind. She couldn't see anything. So we were pulled off the rocks by a blind woman who heard the rope hit, picked it up and put it down. And she just had a passion for boating. They eventually came to Nashville. She also wanted to sing some, so we got to see them here later on, but I had to mention that. And this is a different kind of a lock. It's called a lift lock. It was in Peterborough, in Canada. And let's see if I get the right one pointing here. When you're up top, you pull into this bathtub. The door opens and you pull into this bathtub and they close the doors. And if you're a boat down on the bottom, you pull into the bathtub down there and they close the doors. And then one goes up and the other comes down. And that's how they lift it. 65 feet lift. It seems really funny to stand on the bow of the boat and look down 65 feet. Let's see. Now we're really using Canadian currency. We're getting used to the metric system. We're beginning to hear a lot of French. And if we call for Marina, instead of asking him if he has electricity, I would ask him if he had hydro. And that's what they call their electricity. From there, we did another canal. This one's called the Rideau Canal. And Rideau Canal is this one right here, if I can hold it right there. Goes up to Ottawa, the capital of Canada. The Rideau was built in 1832 after the War of 1812 in defense against the United States because they were concerned about the United States invading and they wanted another way to get to Ottawa. The canal is really narrow some places, and we were called the big boat. It said, big boat coming the lock first, and of course this boat coming towards us, he's holding his shore and I'm trying to hold my shore, and it's a real narrow channel. When you got to Ottawa, there's 8 locks in a row that drop you down into the Ottawa River. And the people walk and chat with you as you're going from lock to lock. Same lockmaster takes you all the way down, turning all the handles. And when they get to the bottom, then they lock boats from there back up one at a time. This is a view from the river, looking up at the locks. And we stayed in the town across from the Capitol. It was called Hull, and rented a car. And we went back to see changing of the guard and a lot of other things in the area. The Rideau waterway that we were on does double duty. It's a boat canal in the summertime, and in the wintertime they close the gates, let it freeze, and they have an ice skating rink that's almost 5 miles long. Going down the Ottawa River, we came to this place called Chateau Montebello. It's one of the largest wooden structures in the world, built by the railroad many years ago. It's a spa. It had Swedish massage, squash courts. I got a massage, I had a great dinner. And that's the fireplace in it. When we left there, we went down to the mouth of the Ottawa River. There's a little town there. I don't have any slides on it. It's called St. Anne de Bellevue. And there we docked right next to the sidewalk downtown where all the stores and everybody was walking around at night. And we toured, and then we ate, and then we came back to the boat and we went to sleep. About 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, the boat rocks and I can hear feet on above my head, and a fellow was boarding our boat. I don't know if he was trying to get the cooler or if he was trying to get our electronics, but he was boarding to get something. And when I yelled at him, he just sped off the boat. So fortunately, that's the only kind of incident we had like that on the whole trip. From there, we go to the St. Lawrence Seaway. Big ship time now. It's up on this end up here. And we're going to go up to Montreal, and we had to get into the St. Lawrence Seaway. When I pulled up to this first lock, they had a dock, and it had a sign that said, stop and call the lockmaster. So we docked the boat, and I picked up the telephone and called him, and I don't speak French, so I could hardly understand him. He was asking for the name of our boat. I said, it's my pleasure, my pleasure. And he told me to wait till he called me over the speakers to come in. I said, fine. So waited, and then I could hear him talking in the speaker, and he was getting agitated. And what he was doing, instead of saying my pleasure, you know what he was saying? Mon plaisir, mon plaisir. And I was missing the call. He had us go in first, and then the Coast Guard cutter came in and docked behind us. A little bit nervous to have a Coast Guard cutter that close to you, but that's the way they wanted us to do it. The lady here is Sarah's daughter, Bethany, who came and rode with us for a week at this time, too. This is inside a typical walk, just to give you a view from the inside. They're all different shapes and sizes and heights. This is another lock. A bunch of recreational boats come in, they'll all tie together, and then they'll close the gates behind them and raise the water. Up to Montreal, I was surprised at the swift current. It was really swift. We wanted to go to Quebec, but not by boat, because it was going to be real hard to come back. So we took a gray line tour and went to Quebec, where the British had scaled, I guess, a 200-foot wall to defeat the French. Quebec at dusk.
Beautiful.
Other sights we saw on the trip up there. From there, it was time to start turning south, And the way we did that is when we, if I can show you on the map over here, we came out of Montreal, and there's a little canal that leads you down into Lake Champlain in New York. And it's this canal here, it's called the Richelieu River and the Chambly Canal. And the canal was interesting because people would be walking or bicycling along the sides, and you could chat with them and see them. Some places the canal was actually higher than some of the houses. There's all different kinds of days on a boat. A lot of days I had some that wasn't working right. This day everything's working just perfect. Sarah took my picture. The wire in my right hand is a little autopilot. I'm just steering left and right, and just a great day when the boats and everything's running that way. And not turning. There we go. We went through customs, this time coming back into the United States, took the Canadian flag down. This is Burlington, Vermont, on Lake Champlain. That's our boat out at the end. Sarah's on the bottom left here. I wish the picture was clearer, but it's not. The mountains in the back are New York. The U.S. Customs said they had not seen a U.S. boat for 3 days. Everybody was coming into the States. Diesel fuel was about $1 cheaper during that time in the States. So we were pretty dry on fuel too, because I wanted to wait and buy the fuel after we got back in. So we ended up spending 56 days in Canada. And this area, as you may know, is where Benedict Arnold won his early military success. Works once in a while, Ashley. Other times it don't. There was a museum in the area called the Shelburne, and it had barns. They brought imported barns and put those around the property. They brought this Ticonderoga steamboat over too and had it in the museum. I just thought it was really an eclectic, interesting museum. From there we went down to, I'll show you on the other map maybe, from Lake Champlain we went down to Albany, New York. And Albany had a 4-foot tide, which just seems strange. It's the first tide we had on the trip. Down the Hudson past West Point down to New York. In New York, we stayed in Hoboken, across from Manhattan near the Lincoln Tunnel. Had a marvelous visit there. And if the clicker will let me leave New York, yeah. We left New York going by the Statue of Liberty. I can remember thinking pretty vividly about my 4 grandparents. 2 of them came in 1899, the other 2 in 1900, and went through Ellis Island. From here, from New York then, we went out in the ocean and went down to Atlantic City, then down to Cape May. Then we came in the top of the Chesapeake. And the Chesapeake, that's the Chesapeake Bay Lighthouse. We did the east side and the west side of Chesapeake, some just terrific boating there, as I'm sure most of you know. My brother lived on the Rappahannock River. This was a marina not far from his house, and he took us over to Williamstown to see colonial life and other things there. Down at the south end of the Chesapeake, there's Norfolk, large Navy base, of course, and it is also on this map over here, at the south end of the Chesapeake, it is mile 0 of the Intercoastal Waterway. And then the Intercoastal Waterway runs from Norfolk all the way down to Key West. It's about 1,200 miles down the Intercoastal. And I'm not going to spend much time on the cities we went. We stayed in the malls, Charleston and Savannah. There's some magic about this. Architecture, interesting in a lot of different places. In North Carolina, we went up the Moose River about 22 miles. This is a boat manufacturing, it's a yacht manufacturing company. So the company that made our boat, it was the Hatteras factory. They weren't making any boat as small as ours. And A friend of ours in Nashville named Tommy Lowe was building this boat while we were there. It's 112
You say
feet
Tommy
long.
Lowe.
Was about a $5 million yacht at that time, and Tommy was just a terrific captain. He took the boat from here when they finished it, and he went through the Panama Canal to Acapulco, and then eventually came up to Nashville with it. But he operated the boat himself, and that's just a lot of boat to handle. These guys joined us on a lot of the trip. When the first time we saw them, Sarah got a camera and was running around the boat taking pictures out when they were splashing on both sides of the boat up front. We were just enjoying it. That evening we pulled into the marina, we had dinner at a restaurant, went back to go to bed, and our bed was soaked. The windows were open in the stateroom, so we had to learn to close the windows in the morning. Hilton Head, Fort Lauderdale, and we were the big boat in Canada. You get to Fort Lauderdale, you become the little boat. Pretty quick, boating capital of the world. This looking down the Florida Keys. The concern I had here was when you're running your boat down through here is they have 3 million lobster and crab pots. If you run over one, you can sure wrap up a propeller pretty quick. Faro Blanco, we're tied up here at the Marathon. Here's my crew relaxing. This is a place called Little Palm Island in the Keys, and you can only get there by boat or by seaplane. They have a dock for transients like us coming through. It was $700 a night, I think, and when we went, and they charged us $100 for the dock for the night. But the place was just terrific. That's part of Little Palm Island. I think there's 29 thatched huts on it. I looked it up on the web, and they're still in business now. So, now we head down to Key West, and we begin, of course, to hear Spanish now, where we had heard French before. Now we're beginning to hear Spanish. Main drag downtown Key West. Pepe's where we begin to eat a lot of Cuban food. I love the vehicles in Key West. People aren't hesitant to paint different colors. We went and toured a cemetery, and I have to tell you 2 quotes. If you've ever been there at the cemetery in Key West, on the one tombstone it said, "I told you I was sick." And the other tombstone said, "He was a good citizen for 35 years, died at the age of 60. I mentioned the Browns, the couple. We met them at this Renaissance fair where the knights were actually using poles and jousting and knocked themselves off horses. The other thing we wanted to do while we were there was to go down to Dry Tortugas, and the Dry Tortugas are off of the map over here. Key West is all the way down the bottom. About 80 miles off the map down the bottom is where the Dry Tortugas are. They used, I think, 16 million bricks to make it. Interestingly enough, this fort was in Yankee hands all during the Civil War. It became a prison, and Dr. Mudd was imprisoned there, who had treated Abraham Lincoln's assassin. We waited and waited for the wind to quit so we could go down one day, and it just seemed like the wind would never quit. So we finally went down on the floatplane and spent the afternoon at the Dry Tortugas. And when the weather changed, after 6 weeks, it started getting nice. We went up and went across Florida. And you cross Florida from Stuart, Florida, over to Fort Myers, go through the Okeechobee, Lake Okeechobee. I get the slides to move. This is a typical walk going across Okeechobee Waterway. This is going into Tampa Bridge. St. John's Pass up by St. Petersburg, typical. See the bridges are open for boats up there. So we've crossed Okeechobee, and we're up in the St. Petersburg area. Next thing we wanted to do is cross 150 miles across the Gulf over to Caravelle. and wanted good weather. So he kept calling the weather where we were and where we were going, and finally got absolute perfect weather forecast. So we were slow boats, so we left 2 in the afternoon and ran all night so we could get to the Carabel the next morning. And around midnight, it's the thickest fog I've ever seen. And for 5 hours, all we could see was blank radar, but we never shut the boat down and got over to Carabel the next morning. Carabel's claim to fame then was the world's smallest police station. I mentioned flowers, just some views of some of the slides and things we had on our trip. Maybe I can use a pointer here. Now we came over through Destin, Panama City, Pensacola, all those towns we stayed in. Down here in Mobile has a fairly large bay. We were crossing Mobile Bay, and a towboat was coming towards us, pushing 2 big empty petroleum barges. And I talked to the captain, and he asked me if I could take him on my starboard side, and I said, sure. So I'm on the starboard side, and he's coming towards us, and just when he gets to us, he begins to lose control of the tow with the wind, and the barges started to blow down on us, and they kept blowing towards us and blowing towards us, and I kept moving over, and then suddenly we're on ground, and the propeller started up full power, and Sarah could tell something was wrong, so she came up on the bridge. I really thought we might have to jump off the boat, but anyway, the boat fortunately kept going. It was kicking up mud and shells, and eventually we could get past the 2 barges and behind the towboat, and we were okay. And he got control of his tow, but I thought, what an irony, do that much of the trip and then get bothered by a towboat. The other thing on this one is, now we're facing the Tom Bigby River right here, and it was fun. The red dash line is the 10 Tom waterway. That's a man-made waterway. I'll show you a little bit on it.
You know, Mr. Maloney wanted to be the first
Change
one.
here.
Tom
The
Bigby.
Browns were with us, the couple I mentioned, and he and I decided we waited a week and it was raining more, so we just decided to leave. It took us about 3 days to get up to the red dash line, and we took turns just leading. He would lead the tow for a while, then I'd take a turn and try to move a lot of the debris out of the way. This is the 10 Tom waterway under construction. I've got some notes on it somewhere. It was finished in 1984. It's 217 miles long. They moved more dirt than they did on the Panama Canal. It's a much bigger ditch than that was. I mentioned debris. This is us coming out of a marina where the debris is accumulated out front. So the Mississippi River is worse than this in terms of size of logs and things, but that's one of the main problems. We were making one lock, and Sarah was a little excited. And I docked the boat, and the gates were closing, and I went down to see why she was excited. Well, there was this snake where she tied the line off. So we stared at the snake, and he stared at us, and the lift came up, and then we took a boat pole and pushed the boat away. We left the snake to his warm harbor there. Typical view, early morning. Some interesting foliage on the 10 Tom waterway. White cliffs. The picture really doesn't do them justice. They are very white. This is a retired dredge. On the 10 Tom, that's our boat at anchor, at the dock over there. And we're up in the museum part. It was a great day. We were the only 2 people there. So we got a super tour that day. Another view of morning mist. 10 Tom has a lot of wood chips and logs and lumber that move on it. These are wood chips. You can see the steam coming off them. You can also see the 10 Tom's a little narrow in those places, so you have to be careful there. This is a marine terminal that's loading out the logs and the timber. Another lock on the 10 Tom. I put this shot in because we were a transient boat. Every marina we went to, we were just transient. We weren't going to stay there. So this is a transient slip for this marina, and as Sarah mentioned, we want to have electricity if we can get it. It's wonderful if we had cable TV. Sometimes you could get a telephone hookup. They could hook city water up. We could fill our water tank, take a pressure shower. And some of them would also empty the sewage tank. We had a sewage tank on the boat. And on the left-hand side here is a fuel dock. So if you wanted to, you could usually get fuel at the transient marinas. And we're coming back home. This is the Cumberland River back at Ashland City in the fall, and we begin to hear national radio stations for the first time in a year. Our wonderful Cumberland down here at fall. And not far from this rainbow, we went into a marina on the west side of Nashville here, and there were some people there we knew, and they took us to dinner. It was really funny because we drove by Sarah's house. And we saw the first Tennessean newspaper. From there, we went to downtown Nashville and docked one night at Riverfront. A Tennessean came down and interviewed us. They ran a story in a Tennessean, and then Teddy Bart had a radio show, and we were also on the Teddy Bart radio show then. When we got home, our Cedar Creek Yacht Club had a big welcome home for us. All these boats were tooting the horn and some others. And Joe, you might have been out there then. I don't know. I
think so.
I think he was probably out there with that armada. Great way to come home. And we spread our paraphernalia out so that the yacht club people could see a lot of things. Same things, by the way, are on those tables over there if you'd like to see any of them. People asked what we did after we got home. We sold the boat because it was really an ocean boat. It's really not a Nashville boat. I used to own part of a boat company up in Gallatin. We made an unusual boat called the Stolecraft. This is a test boat for it. It's a whole other story. Sarah, of course, went back to her very active and successful real estate career. I also learned how to use a little jeweler's torch. This was a tomato juice can. I'd take and remove the metal and try to put them into artwork. We had a fire truck, a 500-gallon fire truck, and we had a decal made for the door. It's the P&S, the Pete and Sarah Volunteer Fire Department. This house, by the way, is the house we own over in West Nashville. We still go over there, and it's on the bluff above the river, and we can still see the towboats. But here's my partner, my co-captain, my wife. Whenever we'd call home, people didn't ask how the trip was going. They asked how the relationship was going. And I can report that it went exceedingly well. They asked if, was the dream worth it for me? I'd say absolutely, especially because of this lady. And to show you how much she worked, that's her gloves from the trip. They're framed and on the table over there. But she caught every line to put out the fenders. She made every lock. I was in over 100 marinas, and she caught all the lines. She certainly did her share of work on the trip, and that's back in Burlington, Vermont. A shot I just love. I'll say that people talk about the love of their life. She's not only the love of my life, she's the sunshine of my life. Thank you all for listening.
Incident you had there?
Most dangerous incident was the one in Mobile Bay,
Okay.
with the sailboat coming towards us. Yeah. We had some others, but that was the worst.
How many gallons of fuel could you?
I think we carried 758 gallons of fuel.
How many did you use?
Not that much. Fuel was not the biggest part of the expense. The marinas were. We got about 2 miles to the gallon, which is phenomenal gas mileage for a boat. So we could go a long way on a tank of, diesel fuel.
Did you ever run aground on the Mississippi?
No, we didn't run over there. We ran aground once, I think, down in Georgia, though, going into a marina. So you'll do that if you run for a year. Anything else? Thank you very much. Oh, there's one more
Do
thing.
you pay at each lock or through your tow with the boat?
In the United States, all the locks are free. There's no charges. We had a charge in Canada. It was minimal, but they took coupons for it. The St. Lawrence Seaway was $10 American. So the locks are put in really for commercial use for navigation and recreation is kind of minimal on that. Yeah.
When are you going again?
That's a good one.
Well, I'll mention we're on another adventure now. We moved to the Heritage side. We thought I'd share adventures.
Do you know what the budget was for this trip?
The budget turned out to be $50,000
That's not bad.
for the year. I happened to design this map that's over here, and over a period of 5 years, we sold $50,000 worth of maps.
Great.
Wow.
We also happened to put $50,000 extra in our boat to get it ready, and when we got home, we sold it for $50,000 more than we paid for it. So the trip was really a wash from that standpoint. A lot of work. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, that-